Now I haven't posted for about a week or so, not since I've finished off this little bike. Since we last spoke, it's had new tubes, new chain and sprocket, and I'm just hunting around for a CDI unit, but that one's ready to go. But what I have been doing is I've been trying to work out which bike to build next. And I've got a choice between this, which is actually a TT 600 Belgarda, but I never liked the look of the Belgarda, so I've mocked that bike up into what I might like to build. This is actually a Honda CT tank, old Yamaha side guards with a traditional style seat off a DT. And I'm not sure about those forks. We might go back to your traditional forks with that bike. But I don't think that's the bike I'm going to build. I've also been having a good hard look at this little bike, which is a Yamaha AG 100. Now what I like about this little bike is it's got the twin cradle frame, which is quite unusual, quite period. It's also a twin shock bike, and they made them for years and years and years, so they were a pretty tough little motor. Originally, when I pulled this bike out to have a look at it, it looked like it was too much. The engine was seized. When I got the head off, we managed to get the engine turning over, but then the gearbox was seized. But I've mucked around with it and I've persisted, and I've found out a few things about this little bike. They're very, very similar in a lot of ways to an MX 100, and they're also very, very similar to the Yamaha CTs. So for a little budget build, that's a nice bike. I've also seen these bikes turned into very nice period races. So at the moment I'm leaning towards an MX 100 build, but I've managed to pick up two other AG 100s. I think one's actually an AG 175, but I'll pick them up. Between them, I'm pretty sure this engine will run now, but between the other two bikes and this bike, I'm sure I'll have enough to build a good bike. Now, I'll tell you why we didn't go with this bike at this stage. When I started it up, it was obvious that there was an airlock in the oil system. And what that meant was that oil wasn't pumping through the motor, and I wasn't getting lubrication to, well, basically to the engine. So I mucked around with that and I fixed it. And ultimately the way I fixed it was poured plenty of oil through your valve covers. Then I laid it on its side. I manually filled the oil filter reservoir, poured oil in, made sure there was oil in the system, and I started it and I ran it with the valve covers off so I could tell when it started to pump oil. And that worked pretty good. Got rid of the airlock and it sprayed oil literally all over the shed. But the problem with this bike, why I won't proceed with this build at the moment, is although this little bike looks much worse, this is actually a bigger job to rebuild, because you can see that oil underneath. That's leaking from the centre of the engine, which means that engine's got to come out and it's got to be totally rebuilt. And these TTs are a little bit harder to get parts for, believe it or not, than the little ag bike. So that bike will get done, but not straight away. It's a bigger job. The whole thing needs to come apart. I mean, have a look at this exhaust pipe. That's got to go. Ridiculous. But anyway, that bike will be a nice bike. The motor does run quite well, but it has got that problem, and I suspect there's two things wrong with it. There's a valve at the bottom of the oil tank, which probably isn't working. Oil's falling down into the sump, and it's falling down onto the ground. So realistically, to try and get that bike running reliably, you need to rebuild that motor, although it does run quite well. This little bike, on the other hand, once we got into it, I tell you what, the simplicity in these engines is really, really something quite nice. You got a couple of head bolts, pull the head off, and then literally the head's held on by two screws. Then the whole barrel lifts off, And all of this mechanism through here, your gear change mechanism, it was the gear shift assembly that was locked. But anyway, pull it apart and give it a little bit of time and effort, and it all went. The other thing is, the oil pump also works on this. It's got good compression, or appears to have good compression, now that it's all turning over. So I suspected this motor will go. I found the carby for it. I'm missing the exhaust pipes, I'm missing the side covers. I haven't got much more than you see there until I pick up these other two bikes, which I'll do through the week. But one thing I did notice while mucking around with this bike is just how good the original factory finishes were on these bikes. Have a look at that wheel. Now you'd swear that's got to go out to be re-chromed. But have a look just here. That's about 2 minutes with a wire brush. Tops. Wouldn't even be that, 30 seconds. So the chrome and the factory finish is pretty good. The same with that front wheel there. You can see what it was like. And just mucking around, trying to assess whether we go ahead with it and what the bike needs to get going. And look how good it comes up. And that's just with a wire brush on the end of your drill. So the factory finishes, here's a bit of the frame that I've started to rub back. And you can see plenty of surface rust all through it. But it's very quick to get rid of. So this bike will come apart completely. All through all these surfaces here and that, they all need to be cleaned up and tidied. When it comes to painting this frame, there's a few options. But one option, particularly if you're going black, is what they used to call the old coach paint or chassis black. And it's a product that you can buy that you paint on with a brush, and it dries flat, and it dries with a very strong gloss, used by hot rodders a lot for wheels and chassis, and it gives you a very, very good finish. So I'm thinking probably when I get all this all pulled down, that's what we'll do with this. I'll have a look at the MX and work out whether I go with an MX CT look to this bike. We're obviously going to have to refabricate the rear end. But here, look, getting back to that original factory finish. Hit that with a wire brush and it goes from, you can see the rust on that, to getting a shine in seconds. And this little shocker I've hit with the brush, and this one I haven't. So they'll have to come off and we'll clean them. I think they'll be serviceable. We'll be able to pull them apart and we'll clean them up. Obviously these pitted springs are not going to polish, so they might become painted, but I suspect the little chrome part in the middle of the shock will clean up. The rubber bushes there look a bit dodgy. We'll work out something there. So this is the bike that I'll be building. And as rough as it looks, out of the two, out of this bike and this bike, this one to me is the better build.